Sometimes a car company builds a vehicle not because they're going to sell an awful lot of them or make a ridiculous amount of money on each one, but just because they want to make a statement. And that is the story behind the BMW i8, this 2015 model. Hi there, Rick DeBrule with a collector car profile. Once again here at the Martin Auto Museum, spectacular collection of more than 170 cars that really span the full story of the automotive spectrum. And I mean, there's everything from an 1886 Benz replica of the first production car to, well, how about this ultimate in hybrid technology, or at least for its day, this 2015 BMW i8. Now let's go back and tell the story of how this car came to be. BMW, of course, was looking forward, trying to figure out how they could make a statement, how they could show that they could be both energy efficient and aerodynamic and have performance at the same time. That's what this car was all about. Its roots, though, go back to 2009. BMW had something called their Vision Efficient Dynamics car. And if you look at that car, you can see the beginnings of what was going to evolve. Now that was a concept car, but they began to take those lines and say, what could we do with them? What if we could build something that had that modern technology, plug-in hybrid technology in a beautiful shape? And that's what it evolved to. Now, you also got a taste of this car before it ever hit production. Now, it began to see the production showroom world in 2014. But in 2011, you got a sneak peek of this car as a movie star in the movie Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol. Tom Cruise was driving around in one of these. It wasn't the production version, still had some changes to go through, but it was a taste of what was going to happen. Now, you could argue that, frankly, this car is unfortunate that it came out when it did in 2014, because the styling still holds. If they came out with this car today, we'd think it was beautiful. But when it came out, it was really probably slightly ahead of its time. I mean, yeah, it has some performance. I mean, 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds, which isn't shabby. But when you look at some of the other supercars, some of the other hypercars, its performance probably isn't quite as great as it could be. But remember, they were trying to make a statement about what they could do. Now, traditionally, when we think of things like the Prius, the hybrids that came before this, those were designed for energy efficiency. Now, there were some cars, though, that were looking at how could we take the hybrid technology and also allow for more power. And that's exactly what they wanted to do here. They wanted to be both energy efficient and have power at the same time. This actually has 3 motors. It's got 1 gas motor and 2 electric motors to combine to give you some pretty impressive performance. And what's also interesting, once again, this is a plug-in hybrid, meaning you can drive 34 miles on this before that gas motor ever kicks in. So is this front engine, rear engine? Well, the answer to that is yes, it's kind of both. I mean, that's because they have 2 electric motors and 1 gas motor, and they had to spread them out throughout the chassis as they were building this. We'll start off by talking about that internal combustion engine. It's a twin turbo with a 3-cylinder, 1.5 liter engine. This is actually the same base motor that you'll find in a Mini. Now, in that form, it produces just a little over 130 horsepower. In this version, they hyped it up with that twin turbo 12 valve. It makes more than 220 horsepower. Now, that's just the ICE engine, the internal combustion engine. You combine that, of course, with the other 2 electric motors that they've got, one of which produces 129 horsepower. And if you use it in what's called the eco mode, when you first start off, all you do is use that electric motor, and then eventually the gas motor kicks in. It also has a comfort mode, which sort of works the same way, and then you get the sport mode. And the sport mode, from the moment you start this car, you're utilizing both the gas engine together with the electric engine, both of the electric engines, to get as much performance as you possibly can. In total, this has 357 horsepower. You know, a combination of that gas engine, the lithium-ion batteries that power the electric engine. So it has a fair amount of performance. And you realize, though, when you look at some of the high performance sports cars of today, like the Corvette, I mean, you know, that'll do 0 to 60 of that mid-engine Corvette of less than 3 seconds. But you have to remember, 4.2 seconds, which was the 0 to 60 when this car first came out in its first iteration, was really pretty impressive when you compare it to a lot of the, you know, the muscle cars back in the day. This could outperform a lot of those cars. So it had great performance. And once again, you have to think about the fact that the McLaren P1, some of the other hypercars, the Porsche 918, yeah, they were faster in terms of being that plug-in hybrid and using that hybrid technology, but they were also a lot more expensive. This cost less than $150,000 when it was brand new. As a result, you were getting an amazing amount of performance along with the styling, along with the technology. And it goes back to, they weren't really trying to make an awful lot of money off of every one of these. What they were trying to do was make a statement about what they could do moving forward. Now, there is one interesting aspect about this car that some people are going to turn their nose up right away. And that's the fact that this, when you're accelerating, has fake engine noise that they pipe into the cockpit. You're going to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they do that. Well, to be honest with you, a lot of cars, a lot more cars than you realize are doing it. Because, you know, cars these days are so quiet. We're used to the concept of that throaty growl as a car is accelerating. Well, cars are so quiet with the way they're being produced that even a lot of internal combustion cars are now adding that element. And of course, in this car, I mean, you know, that 1.5 liter 3-cylinder motor, that doesn't produce a lot of sound together with those electric motors, you know, some of the whine from the electric motors. So what they actually did was they pipe in a little bit of performance noise into the cockpit so you can at least think and feel like you've got that big, huge engine behind you that's pushing you along. While it may be a technical masterpiece underneath, to be honest with you, this car is an absolutely beautiful example of design masterpiece. I love the way they started with this BMW grille up front and stylized it, but it's the aerodynamics of this car that really show everything. I mean, take a look at the front splitter right there, the way the air inlet works. And then as you work your way back, what they've done is they've created this car using thermoplastic polymers, a material that's really just about half the weight of sheet metals. I'll show you those doors in a minute because they open very interesting, but take a look at the aerodynamics of this car, how they've used this channel that runs just above the fender and use this little element, kind of like a rear wing, but not a traditional rear wing that you and I are accustomed to bring the air all the way through the back. And of course, what I really want to show is right beside it. Look at this channel at the very bottom that's allowing the air to come in through and right there go out the back of the car. You can literally see the back of the car. Now that's very similar to what they're doing in modern race cars, Formula One cars, Le Mans cars, where they're using the air to go underneath and channel and create downforce. It's got a drag coefficient of just 0.26. And if you start looking and reading about drag coefficients, which basically means how well does it cut through the air, this does an absolutely amazing job at 0.26. An awful lot of cars can't equal that. So it's a beautiful design. I have to say, when I look at this car and see it driving on the streets on those rare occasions, it is a stunner of a car. But what's even more impressive are the aerodynamics. Once again, when you see these channels and what they've done with them. And while most drivers are probably never going to be able to take advantage of it, they will in a very small way in terms of the fact that they actually are going to get better fuel mileage because this slips through the air so cleanly and efficiently. Another very cool and yet subtle part of the technology of the BMW i8 are these headlights. Now, unfortunately, because we're here in the museum, the car doesn't have a battery, you can't turn them on. But what's interesting about these is they're lasers inside there. Now, these are not the kind of lasers that when you turn them on, they shoot out the front like some kind of ray. What happens is when you turn the lights on, the lasers actually shoot at some phosphorus material that it excites the phosphorus material and then creates a very intense white glow. Now, to be honest with you, I don't really understand any of that, but it's actually more energy efficient than an LED headlight, and it's super powerful. In fact, they can't even run these at full power until the car gets to at least 43 miles per hour because they don't want to blind anybody in slow speed situations. But think about that. The BMW has lasers shooting out the front. In some ways, you can consider this styling a spiritual successor to the BMW M1. The M1 was built between 1978 and 1981. They built 500 of them, and for one reason only, they wanted to go racing. But it was beautifully designed. Giorgetto Giugiaro did the design work on that particular car, and I got to tell you, he nailed it in just about every way. And today, it's a very collectible car. This, I think, is probably the spiritual successor to the M1. And just as the car is both front and rear drive, I'm not sure what to call this door. Is it a scissor door or a gull wing door? Because the reality is, it's kind of both. You know, it looks like a scissor door and then it opens kind of at an angle, but it's actually just more like a gull wing door because it's hinged at the top. It doesn't open and then go up the way a classic scissor door would. But either way, it's pretty darn cool looking. However, having said that, this is not the easiest car to get into. In fact, what they say you should do is when you get in, you sit like this, kind of flop down inside, and then put your legs inside. Now, once you're inside, to be honest with you, it's super comfortable. There's a few other ways to get in, but none of them are probably as efficient as getting in that way. Once you're in here though, boy, I tell you, it looks absolutely beautiful. I love the fact that they've got this display screen up on the front, because back in 2014, that was probably pretty big for its day. Today, of course, we think of it as, well, just way too small. Uses the iDrive system. Everything's comfortable and close at hand. Now, I will tell you that this is technically a four-seater. There is a back seat. I pity anybody who gets stuck in those seats. Even a child would probably be complaining if they were in those back seats. I love the way the seating is. It's so comfortable, everything you want. But there is one thing that this car is lacking in a huge way. There is literally no storage space, because you've got engines front and rear, technology, batteries, all kinds of stuff. Even the modern Corvette has much more storage space than this has. If you're going to be going overnight someplace, yeah, that's what you're going to be using that back seat for, is to throw, whatever bags you've got back there. Because trust me, you're not storing anything in any of the storage space that this thing has. No real trunk anywhere to be, used in case you want to go on a trip. But once again, that's not what this car is about, is it? This car, once again, was a showcase of modern technology from 2014, from that hybrid technology, from aerodynamic technology, and from design technology. I love this car. Another cool piece of technology that is hiding in plain sight is the fact that BMW was the first car to use Gorilla Glass. That's right, the same kind of glass that you and I are used to in our phones and our laptops. Well, this was the first production car to use it. And they did it for several reasons. First off, they wanted the strength of it, but they also wanted to be able to build something that was strong and lightweight. And they actually used it for noise deadening material. But the concept of putting Gorilla Glass into a production car, well, this was the first time it was used. So what is the legacy of the BMW i8? When they ceased production in 2020, they didn't have another one of these, this performance style coupe looking car, even though this was a four-seater, that they wanted to produce. But the technology associated with this car has definitely lived on. And you have to remember, it was actually pretty successful, all things considered. First produced in 2014, they made a roadster version that came out a number of years later. During its run up until 2020, they sold 20,000 of these. The initial price was about $135,000. Eventually, it ended up around $150,000. But that meant it was the #1 selling performance hybrid of its era. I mean, obviously, it outsold the McLaren P1, the Porsche 918 by a massive amount. Of course, it was a lot less expensive than those cars, and those are hypercars designed for, just a very small percentage of the population. These, a lot more people could buy, drive, and enjoy. Now, some people will argue that it's a crime they didn't take this body and put a traditional internal combustion engine in it. If they had done that, if they just put a regular engine back here, or even a decent sized, twin turbo up front, whatever they could have done, they could have sold probably a lot more, and it would probably be a little more respected in the collector car world. A lot of people in the secondary market are kind of afraid of these cars because of all the technology associated with them. If something breaks, what do you do? What do you do with it? But BMW really nailed it in its day. In 2014, you could argue this was a car that was ahead of its time. If they built it a few years later, they could have easily increased the performance, but they wanted to make the statement when they made it. And remember that the electric motor, the primary electric motor that they use in this, remember there's two, but the primary electric motor puts out 129 horsepower. That's the same motor that was used in the BMW i3. The i3, definitely not a pretty car, but their first stab at having an electric car. So the legacy of this car is not so much what it did in its day, but what it predicted for the future. Plug-in hybrids, I mean, that's what everybody wants today. This incredible design, aerodynamics everywhere, the aerodynamic efficiency that everybody's trying to achieve. This was never a race car. It's nothing they were ever going to race, although it did end up on a lot of racetracks because it was a pace car in a number of racing series. So they used this as a pace car. So it ended up on the track, but not as a race car as such. But its legacy today, it's just an amazing looking car with amazing technology that allowed BMW to step into the future forcefully.